friends, and welcome to this week's episode of the My Slice of Life podcast. My name is Sharon O'Neill, and once again I'm coming to you from the Highlands of Scotland, where I'm pleased to say things are starting to get a little warmer. I know the sun's coming out, and while that does mean the weeds are showing, so are the trees and plants that we actually want, so I am delighted. In fact, yesterday we were out for a walk, and we were too hot already. 2nd of April, we were too hot. God knows how we're going to cope in July, but there we were, 2nd of April, absolutely roasting. If you are new here, first of all, welcome and thank you for joining us. This season is all about the folklore of trees and plants, and just before I get to this week's Plant of the Week, I want to remind you to hit that subscribe button. I know it's easy to forget once you've listened to something and you move on, you go and do something else, but it really, really would help me out if you could do that. Every bit of support helps keep this podcast going. And don't forget, please, to use the links in the description. I'd love to see you over on my blog as well as the main YouTube channel. And when you do come over, let me know you're a listener so I can make sure I say hello to you. If you haven't heard yet, I do have a YouTube channel for the podcast, which is separate to my main one. And I'm trying out different ways of doing the videos for that channel. Initially, they were just the standard sort of thing, that gets sent over from Podbean, which is the host site for the podcast. But then I thought I'd try something different. Yeah, me being me. So I tried doing the talk to camera sort of video, but honestly, they took me so long to put together that I really have to try something else, which is what I'm doing for this one. So do go over there and check out the different types of video and let me know which one you prefer. I'm also trying to put as much information and further reading for you in the description too, so that you can take a real deep dive into the topic for yourself if you want to. And last but certainly not least, a very big thank you to Budget Seeds, who are offering my UK listeners a 10% discount when you use the code SO'Neill10 with them. I use them for my seeds and I'm really happy with them, and I love that the prices start from as little as 15 pence for a packet of seeds. You can't go wrong with that. In fact, the kale that I had good success with last year, well, it's still growing, Red Winter, they were selling that for 15 pence just last week or the week before, so it's brilliant. And they also have gorgeous garden ornaments and gifts, so go and treat yourself and your garden. You'll find the link and the discount code for budgetseeds.co.uk in the description as well. Okay, and now we come to the plant of the week, which is the ivy. This evergreen plant has wound its way through mythology, superstition and symbolism for centuries. But what secrets does it hold? Well, get yourself comfy, get a coffee or whatever else you prefer, and let's get into it. Ivy is one of those plants that you can find clinging to old stone walls, winding around trees, and even popping up in Christmas decorations. But beyond its decorative appeal, ivy is seen as quite a contradictory symbol. For many, it represents life, resurrection, making connections, support, resilience, the quest for knowledge, and even eternity, eternal life. But for some, it can also be a sign of poverty and ruin, a cloying and suffocating symbol, even impending death. So you see what I mean by this contradictory, complete opposites depending on what meaning has been taken from it. Ivy is seen as representing the female side of life. If you think about the ivy plant, it's flexible, sinewy, wrapping around strong, tall trees, which some argue will kill the tree, but many will say that actually it's a form of support, and I'll explain that a bit more in just a minute. At this point though, I need to point out that when I'm talking about ivy, I'm talking about the English ivy Hedera helix and the Atlantic ivy Hedera hibernica, which are both common in the UK. So I'm not talking about Boston ivy, which has a Latin name I haven't a hope in hell of pronouncing. It's a North American plant that is also widely planted in the UK, but apparently it's a member of the grape family, so not closely related to ivy at all. Then there is poison ivy, Toxicodendron radicans, I think, which is, you can tell I'm really good at Latin. It's another North American plant that is not closely related to ivy. It's a poisonous plant, causes skin irritation, which thankfully we don't get here. Now the leaves of the ivy are interesting. They are dark green and glossy with pale veins, but the juvenile leaves have 3 to 5 lobes and a pale underside, whereas mature leaves are more oval or heart-shaped without lobes. Only the mature plants produce flowers which are a yellowish green in colour and appear in small dome-shaped clusters known as umbels, and you'll see them start to appear in the autumn. In fact, ivy nectar, pollen and berries are an essential food source for insects and birds, especially during autumn and winter when food is so much harder to find. And I found that out on the Woodland Trust website, where it also says that the ivy is not a parasitic plant at all. And it goes on to say that ivy has, this is just a wee quote, separate root system in the soil and so absorbs its own nutrients and water as needed. Ivy does not damage trees and its presence doesn't indicate that a tree is unhealthy. End quote. I saw someone else talking about that too, and this common belief that ivy kills trees is actually a lot of rubbish. It's only if a tree is damaged or very old and dying that ivy could potentially help to bring the tree down. I think it's more with the weight of the plant, not that it's actually doing anything to the tree that would bring it down. So we'll begin to explore the folklore by starting in ancient Greece, where ivy was sacred to Dionysus. Now Dionysus is an interesting character. He was the son of Zeus and Semele and is often said to be the god of wine. However, according to the channel Story Crow on YouTube, he was the god of divine ecstasy, whereas Wikipedia says he was the god of winemaking, orchards and fruit, vegetation, fertility, festivity, and that all sounds good until you get to insanity, ritual madness, religious ecstasy, and theatre. Point is, when you see depictions of him in art, sculpture and so on, many show him wearing a crown of ivy leaves. The ancient Greeks and Romans believed that they wouldn't get drunk if they were wearing a wreath of ivy leaves around their head. Wine cups were sometimes decorated with ivy, as it was thought to prevent intoxication. I haven't tried it out yet, but if I ever do, I'll let you know how it goes. The Romans had a similar idea with their god, Bacchus, the god of agriculture, wine and fertility, who was often depicted wearing a wreath of ivy and grapevines. It's also said that their followers wore wreaths of ivy as well. And the Egyptian god Osiris was also linked to ivy, and he may have started by teaching about agriculture, but did end up being their god of the underworld. I read a bit on the Owlcation site which said, quote, "In the Middle Ages, ivy was still associated with wine. A branch or a bunch of ivy was often hung on a pole outside a tavern to indicate that the building sold wine or ale. Pole was known as an ale pole or an ale stake. The bunch of ivy was sometimes known as a bush. And from this came the saying, 'Good wine needs no bush,' meaning that something of merit doesn't need to be advertised because the good news will travel by word of mouth." End quote. And some drinking establishments just had ivy grown over the doorway, and that would send the same message. "We sell good wine, come and get it." Now I love looking at label designs, bottles, graphic design, the whole thing. It's a real art form now, I think. So I'm going to make a point of looking for ivy on any wine shops, pubs, or even on bottles when I next go to the store, and I would love you to do that where you are. And let me know if you find ivy leaves depicted on signs, labels and so on, that kind of thing. Now I know there will be vine leaves, so I want you to look for ivy leaves in particular, and let me know if you spot any please, because I would like to know if that association is still used today. Ivy's intertwining nature made it a natural symbol of love and fidelity, and so priests would present a wreath of ivy to newly married couples. In English folklore, a piece of ivy tucked into a bride's bouquet was believed to bring a strong and lasting marriage, and today it's still a custom for bridal bouquets to contain a sprig of ivy. As well as fidelity, ivy was also seen as a plant of passion and fertility, so you can see why it became associated with weddings and a healthy marriage. Ivy was also important in Celtic traditions. It was one of the sacred plants of the Druids, often linked with the holly tree. And in the ancient OM alphabet used by the Celts, ivy is represented by the letter Gort, which, according to the Story Crow on YouTube, symbolises horticulture or garden. He says to think of a walled garden, a place which is secure, protected, and has a cultivated form of life rather than a more chaotic form of life. His videos are really interesting, actually. He's a storyteller, so go and check out his channel if you like quite eccentric, druid-leaning sort of people. I mean, I don't agree with everything he says, but I do find it interesting all the same. That's actually where I heard the connection ivy had in the old days in Britain and Ireland with fairies and the other world. He talked about stories of fairies or other supernatural beings turning into ivy or giving gold coins which go on to turn into ivy leaves. This sounds like a bad deal, but this crow fella says that links them to wealth, as leaves would mean agriculture and land meant wealth. Across northern Europe, ivy was an important part of the pagan winter solstice celebration because it was evergreen. It still had its leaves and berries when almost every other plant was leafless, and since it is an evergreen, we again see the ivy being associated with the eternal cycle of life and death. It was believed in Britain that ivy growing on the side of your house was a sign of good luck, that the occupants were protected and the marriage or family bonds were strong. It was also said, however, that if that ivy was removed, then ruin would befall that household. I did see it said that as well as bringing protection and prosperity while growing vigorously, dying ivy on a house could indicate financial struggles ahead for that household. Another interesting thing I did hear about was if you dream of ivy, because of its contradictory symbolism, if you dream of this plant, you'll need to work out, is it showing you a journey of searching for wisdom, like the plant working its way up the tree to gain light, or is it blindly creeping on the forest floor, can't see the woods for the trees, or blocking your ability to see, that sort of thing. I found that an interesting interpretation, so I wanted to mention that as well, just so you know that it's included in this whole dream thing. What's it telling you? And that will be down to interpretation depending on what's happening in the person's life, obviously. In medieval Europe, ivy was sometimes planted on graves, symbolising the soul's eternal journey. A surviving folk belief in some parts of the UK holds that if ivy grows over a church doorway, it means the congregation will thrive. But again, if the ivy is stripped away, the church community may well dwindle. And it's very similar, isn't it, to the ivy growing on your house. All will be well if you leave it alone. Now, holly and ivy are often paired together, with the holly symbolising man and the ivy for woman. And it was thought this pairing would bring peace to a household at Christmas. But it should be noted that ivy was only ever to be brought into the house on Christmas Eve and not any other day, or it was incredibly bad luck, even if it was brought in accidentally with the firewood. And that belief is not that old. I saw somebody online saying that even their granny said that, and that's only a couple of decades ago, so we're not going that far back for that one. According to Sir James Frazer's The Gold Bough from 1890, ivy and holly were often used together during midwinter festivals to symbolise the ongoing battle between light and darkness. Some believed that bringing ivy indoors encouraged friendly spirits, while others feared it would invite bad luck if not accompanied by holly. So another contradiction there. You don't bring it in unless it has holly with it, and just earlier we heard you can only bring it in at Christmas. A lesser-known superstition says that if ivy leaves are placed in water on New Year's Eve and remain fresh overnight, it's a sign of good health for the coming year. If they wither, it could mean illness or misfortune. Now again, I did see a slightly different variation of that where it wasn't the next day you had to look at them, it was the 12th night you were to check it. But ivy was also used for divination at Halloween. Every member of the family would take an ivy leaf and mark it with their name. The leaves were then put in a bowl of water, and by the morning, if any of the marks had turned into the shape of a coffin, then that person's death was apparently imminent. Now let's talk about ivy's role in relation to healing magic. Its main powers are said to be for protection and healing, and it was said to bring good luck to women if they carried it with them. It was thought to ward off negativity and disaster wherever it was grown, and often used in fidelity and love charms and paired with holly, again that link with the female and male. Ivy is often described as a plant that can ward off negative energy, and hanging a sprig of ivy over a doorway was thought to keep out unwanted spirits or ill wishers, and I'm assuming it had to just be kept on the outside of the door because again it would be bad luck to bring it inside. Another curious belief was that ivy could reveal a person's true love. In some old English traditions, placing an ivy leaf under your pillow was said to bring dreams of your future spouse. And in Scotland, at one time, young women would pick 9 ivy leaves at midnight and place them under their pillows to see their destined love in a dream. Now, medicinally, ivy has been used for centuries, though caution is needed because certain parts of the plant can be toxic if consumed, and a lot of the sites I looked at said that they wouldn't recommend using ivy now, so please bear that in mind. We're going back to the old days. People are very, very cautious of using this plant now, so it is not recommended. But in the old herbal texts, ivy was used externally to soothe sore muscles or treat skin conditions, and Nicholas Culpeper, the now infamous 17th century herbalist, wrote in his Complete Herbal that ivy leaves boiled in vinegar were used to ease sunburns and cuts. Even today, ivy continues to be a plant full of meaning. It's often used in gardens and landscaping, and its traditional associations haven't completely faded. You might still see ivy in wedding bouquets symbolising everlasting love, as I mentioned before, and of course it remains a popular choice for Christmas decorations too. Whether you believe in these old tales or not, it is fascinating to think about how deeply connected plants are to human history and imagination, and it makes me wonder where all these ideas come from originally. So the next time you see ivy creeping up an old stone wall or twining through a winter wreath or climbing up some tall tree that you're seeing in the woods, remember, it's not just a plant. It's a piece of history, magic and folklore. And just before I close, I'm going to apologise if I sound a bit rough. I'm not feeling all that great, and I don't know whether it's hay fever or the start of some sort of chest infection, because this is the time of year that I do get them, if I'm going to get one. Touch wood. Yeah, I mentioned that last week. So I'm going to go and take all the herbal things I can find in my cupboard. I hope it hasn't been too distracting for the episode. If you have made it this far, thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, leave a thumbs up and a comment or some other amazingly positive interaction, because it really does help the podcast. I'll be back next Monday, all things being well, with another folklore episode. But until then, you take care of yourself.